So this week on the Recently Canceled podcast, we're talking about these brand new retro consoles. You know, cashing in on that nostalgia with the Atari VCS, Neo Geo Classic, whatever Sega's doing with their Mega Drive. Are they ever going to have a Saturn, Dreamcast? Maybe there will be a Sony PlayStation Classic. I'm also going to be tearing into Funko Pop, and for Patreon exclusive, Samantha Bee. So pour your homemade Red Bull that I showed you how to make years ago, and let's do this.
The Recently Canceled podcast with Vaughn.
Hey, how goes it? So, I'm seeing a lot of news come in about these retro consoles. It's been a few weeks ago, we got some news on the Neo Geo, and then recently we got some news on the Atari. So let's start out with this Atari. This Atari VCS, as they're calling it, which I think is the original name of the Atari home console that really took America by storm in the late 70s. And then once I think the 5800 came, was it 5400, then 78 or 72? Anyways, they then renamed it 2600, so most people called it the Atari 2600, and those others were never as successful for various reasons. And this is part of the problem for this console, this venture. I think somebody had bought the Atari name, and they thought, okay, what can we do with this? Well, the NES classics sound like hotcakes when it's available. Same goes for the Super Nintendo. There's money to be made on nostalgia. Hey, you remember Atari? I remember Atari. Well, you want to buy this? I guess. I think you're going to have a bit of a problem because though this will come with, it says 100, not exactly listed, new and old classic games from the Atari 2600 library, the 2600 library is not that good. There's a lot of healthy names there. A lot of bad arcade ports is what it comes down to. You don't believe me? Try playing Mega Man on the Atari 2600 and look at how it is at the arcade. This was a very limited console, and it wasn't until the Nintendo Entertainment System came around that we really got in touch with the characters. And yeah, we had Donkey Kong over in the arcade. Pac-Man was in the arcade. There's a few arcade games that had characters, okay, sure, that weren't just necessarily spaceships or a paddle, but it wasn't until Nintendo embraced the characters that people really got the feels. That they're like, oh, hey, I want to play as Mario. I want to be like Mario. I want to be like Zelda. When you venture back and you look at first, second generation of consoles, it's a lot of dots. It's a lot of blocks. And that's it. Maybe generic shapes. There wasn't anything endearing, and a lot of the games are less than stellar. Yar's Revenge is probably the one worthwhile Atari 2600 game that wasn't an arcade game. You know, most of these were, what can we put a name on? And you end up with E.T., a game that was put out in a very remarkable, quick turnaround. It had to be out like by Black Friday because back then, kids, you didn't have downloads. You didn't get patches. You bought the game and that was the game. So the Atari VCS has an AMD custom processor. It's basically a Linux box. It's going to have some kind of promise of ability to play multimedia, music, video, stuff that you're doing elsewhere, on your phone, on your Xbox, your PlayStation, your computer. And that's what this is. It's like what was it, UA, that no one bought, that I saw on shelves at Walmart and there was no interest in. It didn't have a killer app. It played the games that were on your phone, but now you had a controller to do it. And with this, $200 for the early bird, you don't even get the controller. What kind of controller hooks up to this? Probably something proprietary. They got to make some money selling the peripherals to you, don't they? You're going to get kind of sick of tired of playing the old games with that Atari joystick with the one button on the top. Very limited. Nintendo comes in, invents the directional pad, and makes arcade gaming doable. Well, it makes games that are made for being played at home on a TV. That felt right. I think those buying this, maybe they're unaware of the Atari. Maybe somebody in hearsay talked about it and now they're curious. I don't see how there could be much of a market for this. And sure, they met their fundraising goal. 2018 launch unlikely. I don't. Why is AMD in on this? How hard up is AMD right now? That seems really bizarre to me. You're not going to make a foothold. You're not going to get new games on a console. What, maybe 1 million people get? That's not happening. You got maybe 30 Xbox Ones out there. Maybe 30 million. What is it? 70 or 100 million PlayStation 4s across the world. Even then, everybody's gravitating to the iPhone and the Android because those are more present. They're everywhere. Everybody has one of those. Not everybody has an Xbox One. So all the little indie developers are making the mobile games. They're not going to sit and spend time making an Atari VCS game. And a brand new console that doesn't have exclusive content, or any new content for that matter, just cannot really exist. So do they say, hey, it's a hit in the classic retro sense? It comes preloaded with some games, and you're going to be able to download some from the store, so it has internet capability. A lot of people wanted to be able to have internet capability in their NES Classic and Super Nintendo Classic, but Nintendo was not really interested in keeping a store up for those, and it's kind of a shame because I could have seen a lot of people really, instead of hacking their console, like plunging money into it to try to get online gameplay. Play Street Fighter 2, I'll bet. Yeah, Street Fighter 2 Turbo on the Super Nintendo version, not the actual arcade, but play it online. Yeah, people would be down with that. And if you hacked your game, you wouldn't have access to the store and the features. That would have prevented a lot of piracy because those units have become ways to make a RetroPie without buying the RetroPie. You could play all these games that don't belong on a Super Nintendo, but you have Nintendo's hardware to some extent. Well, at least you have their controller, right? So that felt good. That felt like the right experience to many people. Maybe that's the play here for those holding the Atari name right now is, look, we can give you a better version of your everything you want to hack box. Maybe be very lenient. Hey, you still get access to our store, and you can still watch media on this. There'll be like a Netflix app, but you've got Netflix app on something else, right? If you're listening to this, you're capable of doing that on whatever you're capable of. It could be built into your smart TV. A lot of people have a smart TV right now. You're hooking this up to a smart TV. I got news for you. Your smart TV has similar functions to whatever the VCS has in store. So I think this is really disappointing, and it's basically DOA. I don't think they're going to sell much after the initial launch, and you may be a pipe dream to ever find this in a store, honestly. To really get mass production behind this, something doesn't sit right here. Similarly, SNK Playmore once put out the Neo Geo Classic, which I think has just as many issues, if not more. Because at least the Atari 2600 has some kind of foothold, or did, in America. It was the console. It was video games. It was something people picked up, and maybe they didn't play it, but it was cheap, and it was the cool thing to have. It was a fad. It was the Wii of its day. No one had an Atari, had a Neo Geo AES. No one. In America, the Neo Geo is mostly known for the MVS, the arcade unit, the big red machine, which had 1 to 2, I think up to 4 slots to plug in various games. It was a great idea at the time. You just change out the marquee slightly, you plug in a new game into a slot, and now you have a new arcade game with the same cabinet. So it's cheaper for everybody to operate, made a lot of money, and they stayed around, and I still see them. I see them at the laundromat where you've seen me do some stand-up comedy that didn't turn out too well, but that's not my problem. Well, Neo Geo puts out their classic, and it's built to look like the candy cabinet of Japanese arcades. In Japan, they sit down when they game, like old people at the slot machine. That's what they do. So that's the look they're going for, and the international version is not bespoke to the American audience. It doesn't look like the big red machine. It's just slightly painted a little different. It's not even red. and it looks fairly cheap. It doesn't look... Well, I mean, for one, it has a screen built in, but who wants to play on a 3.5-inch screen with a joystick and buttons for Stuart Little or the late Vern Troyer? It just doesn't make any sense to me. You're going to want to plug in something. It probably doesn't come with the controllers. They probably want to get some money on those peripherals, right? Now, if they actually have the AES's arcade stick available for this, now we might be talking. This might be the best way to get the Neo Geo experience at home yet. But even then that's a problem. Because your RetroPie setup is going to be cheaper and you can add any game you want. I'll bet not necessarily legally. But you just had Unibios 4.0 come out and everything should be up and running easily enough. Although with this it's going to be 100%. But you got to wonder, does it have more space to store than the Super Nintendo and NES Classic? If so, maybe it's the better alternative for hacking and adding everybody else's console to. Even as a Neo Geo game, yes, the Neo Geo is more powerful. It was basically a 24-bit machine that, it's costing like $1,000. The games are $200 a piece. They're only more expensive today. No one had it. But they were all built to be arcade games. And when they were brought to the console, putting in the extra coin to get a new life became replaced with do good and earn extra lives. And so there's a limitation. There's a lot of fighting games. There's beat 'em ups, a few shooters. There isn't anything that you sit down, play some, and come back and play over the course of several days with a story. There isn't Super Mario World. There isn't Zelda. There's no RPGs. There's none of that. So these games were supposed to be beaten in like 45 minutes. Yeah, they're good games, but they're good for an arcade. This will give you an arcade experience at home. It's not necessarily the in-depth video gaming experience you may actually get more of from a Super Nintendo, where the games were actually smaller. Yeah, there was some massive cart space. These carts got bigger and bigger. I think on the splash screen it says 330 Max Pro Spec. It goes over that for something like Guru Mark of the Wolves. That's more megs than this. I mean, these were trying so hard to keep up with the CDs. Yeah, it's just a shame that somebody who could put out a classic CD system isn't. Even though we have the space now, that we don't even need the CDs. We have exceeded that. Just imagine 10, 15 years ago, if you wanted to get something that had... how could I forget the name of it? You don't have a hard drive, but you have... this computer I'm using actually has a disk hard drive, but... you get flash memory drive in anything now, so cheap. You could easily get 32 megabytes in there. Or 32 gigabytes. You only get 500-ish, or is it 250? I think it's less than 500 with the operating system, but on the Super Nintendo Classic. So you couldn't add much. But Sega could have done this, but no. The way Sega operates, Sega says, look, the Genesis is our biggest hit, so that's the only thing we care about. We'll give you a retro Genesis every year that's slightly different, with a slightly different set of games and a lot of shovelware. Yeah, we'll put Sonic on the box, and every once in a while there'll be the Streets of Rage collection, but sometimes there won't. And it'll look really cheap and plasticky, but it'll look like the Genesis Model 1 enough for us to put it on the box and have a few people buy it for $60 or whatever, because they couldn't get their hands on Nintendo's product. They couldn't get the NES Classic, they couldn't get the Super Nintendo Classic, but they can get this. And for Papa and Grandma, that's good enough, right? And they pair up with this At Games to put out the crappiest stuff, to make the cheapest looking thing they can, that's still close enough through licensing agreement resembles the Genesis, and with bad emulation has differing sound effects and off music, and a UI that doesn't quite work right. It's no Super Nintendo or even NES Classic, right? See, Sega seems to be stuck in this two ways. They only want to focus on the Genesis because that was their big seller. So they're concerned that if they made a Saturn Classic, no one would buy it. If they made a Dreamcast Classic, since the Dreamcast lasted all of a year, no one would buy it either. That's their concern. They see these as losing consoles. Consoles that lost the war. Whereas the Genesis actually gave it a pretty good go. So you're always going to get a Genesis / Mega Drive out of Sega. And it seems like for the near future, it's always going to be tied to AtGames. It's never going to be a real Sega. It's not Sega building hardware. So don't count on ever seeing a Saturn or Dreamcast Classic, as cool as those could be. As much as those could be the more powerful setup, playing the games that people have talked about that they really didn't get a shot to play because they were gone too quick and everybody had to migrate over to the PlayStation. If you wanted to play games, you had to get that PlayStation or N64, right? I mean, shoot, Nintendo's not really that serious about putting out an N64 Classic. Try bundling those controllers into a box, right? Now you're taking up a lot of space. They have to change so much on the internals to put these games in there because they're bigger games. And there's all kinds of emulation and coding problems with N64 games. It's going to be hard to get that 100%. I don't think they're too keen on putting a Nintendo 64 Classic out there, but they just want to resecure some trademarks. That's what they're doing right now. It's like, oh, hey, N64, guess what? We own that. Well, Sony could actually make a real play at this. Sony's winning the console war right now against Microsoft because they're actually willing to have, get this, exclusive titles. The Xbox has one exclusive title that I can think of, Sunset Overdrive, and it seems to be coming to Windows. And it's not even new. Meanwhile, PlayStation goes and shows you God of War, whichever number, and then this Detroit game, exclusives. I mean, I was pissed when I walked over to Walmart the other year to get Street Fighter V and found it was exclusive to the PlayStation. You have exclusives, you have some reason for people to buy your box and not just play on PC. Because right now on Xbox, you're playing on PC. You're playing PC ports. The ports are coming to the Xbox, and they're games that are set up to be played with mouse and keyboard. And you're ended up getting your ass kicked by anybody cheating using a mouse and keyboard. And that's the reality of it. Sony could very well put out a Sony PlayStation Classic, a mini PlayStation, without the CD drive, but a ton of games put in, more memory than the Super Nintendo, and everybody look for it to be hacked. Or they could give it online capability. You would have loved to have played some online gaming on those PlayStation games, wouldn't you? That could be a huge moneymaker for the otherwise struggling Sony. The only thing doing good for them is the PlayStation. Hell, they had to sell off the Vio computer brand. Their movie studio is tanking hard. I mean, they're running Columbia TriStar into the ground over here. And you know that Venom's not going to make much money. You can see it. Could Xbox get in on this? An Xbox Classic? My friends and I would joke that the Xbox was just the Halo converter. Oh, hey, I brought Halo. Oh, did you bring the Halo converter? Ah, crap, I forgot. Because that's about all it was good for. You could play Ninja Gaiden, you could play Fight Night, 2004? There was a couple games here and there, but it was nice having a hard drive you could burn some music to, listen to your custom soundtrack. I played Xbox Live on the original Xbox. It was a blast. Though, if you really remember it, you remember the lag. There was a lot of lag. There was a lot of disconnecting, but that was the internet then, even broadband. But it was still fun. There was a fun factor there. Could Microsoft be looking to do that to make some money? I don't think so. I think they're more interested in just having those games brought in backwards compatible for Xbox One and call it good. I think that's their play. But I don't see much more future for these retro consoles. I'm writing off the VCS and the Neo Geo as DOA already. I think the price points are going to be too high on either of them. The appeal's going to be limited, and when those crash and burn, Sega's definitely going to be like, well, we're not giving you that Dreamcast Classic now. That justified that move. That's what they're going to be saying. Okay, so let's move over to another topic here, Funko Pop. I'm scrolling through Netflix, and there is a freaking Funko Pop documentary on Netflix. I think it's a Netflix original too. And it talks about how the birth of Funko starts in 1998. This is in the description, and it says now their products are beloved. It's built on, fans or whatever. And there was something in the description there that was entirely accurate. I'm going to have to look this up because it really summarized how crappy this company is. So I'm firing up my Netflix app to take a look at this. Just everything Netflix ads just makes me more angry. Okay, so it says here, pop culture purveyor Funko started in a garage in 1998. I can believe that. Today, its vinyl figures are beloved worldwide, and the company credits fans for its success. Yeah, because the only thing Funko Pop vinyls have to stand on is you being a fan of whatever they have licensed up. That's it. You like the Golden Girls? Well, guess what? You can get the Golden Girls set now. You're going to want to get all of them. You don't want to just leave Ruth or Estelle or whoever. Yeah, you're not... It's so bad. Everything looks cuted up. It could be a horror figure. It could be Freddy Krueger. Oh, but it's cute. So girls had to get it. That's the gameplay here. Well, the scheme. Oh, hey, I'm a fan of that, but I'm a girl and it's cute, and so I have this now. Oh, but don't take it out of the box because it might be collectible someday. How is something so mass-produced, but then made into a suitable collectible going to be collectible? It doesn't make sense. You had an old figure that was supposed to be played with when it was new in the 80s. It becomes collectible. Things that are made to be collectible are not actually collectible. That's not entirely how it works. Ferrari put out cars to make money, not for people to have collectibles in the future. Well, they put out cars for people to actually race, people to use them. Collectability is a byproduct of success. Or maybe if it wasn't a hit product, maybe it was one that people who wanted it couldn't afford and eventually can. A Dodge Viper could be collectible, even though they never sold in mass numbers, and maybe they never were really intended to. Now, a Dodge Viper is not designed to look like the Millennium Falcon because you like the Millennium Falcon, so now we're making this. Funko Pop figures, unlike, say, Lego, do not stand on their own. You had Legos as a kid that were blocks, that were bricks. You might have had the minifigures. And then Star Wars Legos shows up. And it's like, okay, cool. Two things alike, Star Wars and Legos. That's all right. I'll play with that set. For me, though, I had like a Robin Hood type thing with knights and Robin Hood and pirates, and we kind of mixed them up. So the pirates and Robin Hood and the knights kind of all ended up in the same world in my Lego land, all right? But the point here is, Legos were things. You could play with Lego Knights. They didn't need to be exclusively licensed from something else. There were Legos before there was Star Wars. There was Lego sets before there was Star Wars Legos. There were things to do with these other than just sit and look at them in a box. You don't play with a Funko Pop. You put it on your desk and it humiliates you. Everybody walks by and sees that you're an idiot, a gullible sucker who overpaid for something that was labeled limited edition. How limited can this shit be when every one of them's limited? Can we seriously discuss that? Oh, hey, now you have to go to all these conventions just so you can get the limited Funko Pop and then sell that on eBay to pay part of your ticket to go to the place? Like, shallow existence of being a fan. Yeah, fans made this crap possible because fans are the first in line to be suckered. God, I hate the Funko Pops. Can you tell? Yeah, I mean, are they not hideous enough? Oh, but they're cute. It's just so cheap and easy to make something cute if you don't even have to shoot for realism. Oh, hey, just give it the same pose, and we're going to just switch this out slightly. Paint the face a little bit different, give him a different hair, and there we go. We got a guy from The Walking Dead. So, hey, that does it for the free version of the recently canceled podcast. Now, for those of you on Patreon, I'm going to talk about Samantha Bee.